What's up, everybody? My name is Tucker. In today's video, we're going to be talking about some Ben Simmons news. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like rating on it and subscribe to the channel as well for more videos just like this one every single day. With those things said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we got a report yesterday from Shams and Woj basically saying that Philly is starting to pick up their discussions with other teams. There's a couple of different reasons for that we'll get into later on in the video, but the two main points specifically from the report are that Philly is talking to teams about 2-3 team deals. They're trying to get a top 25 player in exchange for Ben Simmons. They're becoming increasingly motivated to push up their timeline to get a trade for Ben Simmons because they're realizing that they're going to need to make a move if they really want to try and be championship contenders this season. And then the other aspect of this is specifically as it relates to Portland, Damian Lillard's not getting moved. He is not available to be traded. He does not want to be traded. Portland does not want to trade him. This is important because it's a new front office regime a little bit going into place there, and they have made it clear to Philadelphia as well as the rest of the league that Damian Lillard will not be traded. So it's nice to have some concrete, real news and a real understanding of what's happening there with Lillard. That's very, very helpful. Now, as it relates to Ben Simmons, there's a couple of different reasons why Philadelphia would suddenly be more motivated to discuss Simmons trades with other teams. One, I think it's pretty much clear to everybody at this point, he's not going to come back and play. There was some hope in the beginning of the year that they could basically force him into playing. He's not mentally ready to play. He's dealing with some stuff, and he's just not going to play for the Sixers, point blank. So that's part of it. The other part of it is Joel Embiid's been having an awesome season. Their team in general is pretty good. Not at the same level they'd be if Simmons was on the floor, but it's very clear that if you were to replace Simmons with something pretty close to equal value, they would be a championship contender at the top of the Eastern Conference. And then also, this coming Wednesday, December 15th, is a very important deadline within the NBA calendar because all these players, I think it's like upwards of 80% of the league, that signed new contracts this past offseason will now be eligible to be traded this coming Wednesday, December 15th. This is a big deadline every single year. If you are someone that's doing a lot of fake trades, if you go into the NBA trade machine and you try and trade different players, a lot of times, as of now, those trades will fail, and it'll have a little message at the bottom, and it'll say that these players cannot be moved until December 15th because they have been recently signed. Once that gets lifted, it becomes much easier to match salaries because you have different players that are now able to be involved in the trades, and also to get multiple teams involved. I think that's probably the biggest part of this is there have probably been Ben Simmons trades on the table that will look relatively similar to what he ends up being moved for, but it's just easier to make everybody happy and to move a ton of different pieces around to involve 2, 3, 4 team trades here, similar to what Daryl Morey was doing back in Houston when they made the Westbrook trade and they moved Capella. I mean, that was a huge trade. Something similar to that could be a structure we see here with Simmons, and that's just much easier once this December 15th deadline passes. And of course, the last part of this is that the trade deadline is coming up within the next couple of months. And again, this is a team that looks to be potentially a conference title contending team if they are able to move Simmons for pretty adequate value. So that's really where the momentum here is coming from. It's not necessarily that Philadelphia is that much more motivated to move Simmons now. I'm sure they've always been motivated to move him for a price that they think is fair, but it's just logistically, it's a little bit more possible now, and that's kind of what this report is explaining. So with that knowledge in mind, what teams can we think about now that Ben Simmons could potentially go to that their situation might be a little bit easier for him to be traded to with this deadline passing and things like that? So there's a couple of different teams here that I do have on the list that I want to discuss. First up, when I thought about what's a team that moved or that signed a lot of guys this offseason that might be able to use those contracts and then potentially get Simmons in exchange, and I thought about the New York Knicks. The Knicks have not had a fantastic start to the season. They've been disappointing. They haven't really been able to figure out a rotation. They can't really guard. It's just not going well. This is a team that invested heavily this offseason in trying to create a much better team. Now, this is obviously a little bit weird for Philly. This is going to be the case with a few teams on this list in terms of trading Ben Simmons within the conference and against teams that you're going to be playing 4 times a year. But ultimately, it's really not that big of a deal. But for the Knicks specifically, they've got all this money that will now be able to be moved on the 15th. Guys like Nerlens Noel, Derrick Rose, Evan Fournier, guys that signed these new contracts will be able to be moved on the 15th. And the other part of this is this might be the time for them to look at moving the RJ Barrett piece. And it might not be specifically to Philadelphia. We could see RJ Barrett go somewhere and Ben Simmons go to New York And then wherever RJ Barrett went to, they send a veteran top 25 piece in exchange to Philadelphia. You move some other pieces around the edges on that. There could be some kind of structure there where the Knicks move some of these new salaries that are able to be moved. They get Ben Simmons, they move RJ Barrett. They just shake some things up there. Obviously, the Simmons-Randall fit doesn't fit super well. Maybe Randall is the guy that possibly gets moved. There's a lot of different options here with New York, but when I thought about a team that had a lot of players under contract that wouldn't have been able to be traded until this upcoming Wednesday, that was a team that came to my mind. Next up, of course, you do have to talk about Portland. It's not going to be for Dame. CJ McCollum is the name that continually comes up. The problem with him is that he currently has a collapsed lung, which is obviously an issue. He's injured, and not that they need to trade him next week or anything, like not that Ben Simmons needs to be traded next week, but obviously you want to make sure that CJ's healthy by the trade deadline, because I think continually in terms of like a realistic perspective, what's the easiest Ben Simmons trade you can come up with? Something revolving around CJ McCollum checks a couple of boxes. He's pretty, I don't know if he's a top 25 player, but he's close, I guess. He's a perimeter player, which is an issue we're going to talk about later, where a lot of the available top 25 guys are bigs at the moment. And it's pretty fair value. You can figure some things out. Those are two teams going in two different directions. And just a roster shakeup for Portland, getting Ben Simmons, pairing him with Damian Lillard. We've talked about that in the past. That might potentially work. Another team, Detroit. Jeremy Grant is a player that is an interesting fit in Philadelphia. If you just want to go back to, let's just create the biggest, athletic, defensive-minded team we can think of, Jeremy Grant, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid together is a really, really strong group when it comes to just having length and size and activity. And if you're exchanging Ben Simmons for a player like Jeremy Grant, it does help because Jeremy Grant's on the floor, he can guard. The problem with that is you're really, really relying on guys like Tyrese Maxey, because if you're not getting a perimeter player back and you're getting a wing or a big, you still have this significant issue if you're Philly, and that is perimeter creation on a consistent basis. No disrespect to Seth Curry or Tyrese Maxey, but most of the time championship level teams have like Chris Paul or Kyrie Irving or someone like that that's going to create, that's going to facilitate, that's going to be able to score late game. And this has been a theme for forever. If you have to rely on a big to get you shots down the stretch, it can be a little bit difficult to get those guys shots and then have them create just because they're not as good of passers. But that is another concept to potentially throw out there. Another team, Sacramento. I'm starting every trade situation at this point for Ben Simmons with who has a top 25 player, someone that can be considered close to a top 25 player, because that's what Philly wants. That's continued to be the thing. Top 25, top 30. They have a list of players that they'd be willing to trade Ben Simmons for. And I'm trying to think, who are those teams? Buddy Hield's not one of those guys. De'Aaron Fox is not one of those guys. But maybe you can start to package something together that equates to that, right? So for Sacramento, it could be Buddy Hield and Halliburton. It could be De'Aaron Fox, whatever the case may be. Sacramento is probably just willing to shake up their roster and get Ben Simmons, who's better than anybody on their roster. But then whoever you'd be sending back to Philly would hopefully be more willing to play for Philadelphia than Ben Simmons is. And then last up, I thought about Toronto as well with Pascal Siakam. But that points to a couple of the issues here. So here are the main problems with a Ben Simmons trade. One, their desire and need for a top 25 player, most of which that are currently available, Domantas Sabonis, Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner, not top 25 player, but still, are big guys. And that's the problem, is you need a perimeter guy. Ideally, you want like a James Harden level player to go alongside Joel Embiid, and those two guys just create, you have your 1-2 punch and you're good to go. If you're getting a big or a wing, then it's, okay, Tyrese Maxey is our starting guard in the playoffs. No disrespect to him. He's been really good to begin this season, but you ideally want someone a little bit more proven in that spot. That's why, way back, the Malcolm Brogdon trade was potentially interesting. And so maybe there is a scenario where it's like LeVert and Sabonis in exchange for Simmons and Maxey and whatever the case may be. I don't know. I'm just throwing some stuff out there. But that is an issue, is that not only do you need a top 25 player, but you need one that fits on this roster, and a big really doesn't. Ideally, as well, you would like to send Ben Simmons to the Western Conference, because this is a Philly team that's not rebuilding. They're not breaking it down. They're trying to push towards the top of the conference. And if you trade Ben Simmons to a team that's kind of pushing to be up there in the first place, then you could raise their ceiling, thus limiting your ability to actually make the conference finals and the finals as well. That's a problem. And then you're still kind of waiting on teams to really declare that they're in a rebuild mode. Similar to how Indiana did earlier this week, the picture isn't quite clear for a lot of these teams. It'll become clearer as we get closer to the deadline, but in terms of an immediate move, not knowing where some of these different teams are at is an issue when it comes to Ben Simmons trades. So ultimately, this report does tell us a lot of things, and it does indicate that they are going to be looking at making this move relatively soon. I don't think it's going to happen within the next week, but it becomes much more realistic next week. And prior to the trade deadline, I'm hoping that we do get a resolution to this Ben Simmons situation so that Philly gets better, so that we can see what they actually look like around Embiid, and so that we get to see Ben Simmons back on the basketball court. Hopefully he can get his situation together and this whole situation can be resolved. It's kind of exhausting, but this is news. This is interesting, and it's cool to kind of look into and evaluate what this means for the Simmons situation. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you guys very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, be sure to check out the boxes on the screen, and as I said, subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this every single day. With all those things said, once again, my name is Tucker. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Saturday and your weekend, and I will see you all next time.